The galactic capital was abuzz with excitement as the grand docking bay came to life with the arrival of a new diplomat. The city was alive with the hum of ships, their engines roaring in the vast expanse of space, and people gathered from every corner of the galaxy to witness the event. It was not every day that a representative of Earth, a small, distant planet, was sent to such a high-stakes diplomatic mission. The news was circulating like wildfire. But there was one person who paid little attention to the news, the Galactic King, and his mind was set on a far darker plan. The king had never been one to believe in peace talks or diplomacy. His empire had grown vast, its reach stretching across countless star systems, but his hunger for control had only increased with time. Earth, a relatively new player on the galactic stage, was seen as insignificant by the king. To him, the diplomat's arrival was a mere formality, and he had no intention of treating it as anything more. In his eyes, the Earth's diplomat was just another obstacle in his path to ultimate power. He had already made up his mind. She had to be eliminated. He had never seen her before, but that didn't matter. The Earth diplomat, the woman who would represent a fragile hope for peace, had caught the king's attention only for one reason. She stood in the way of his ambitions. The king had learned everything about her. Her name was Lyra Volkov, and she was supposed to negotiate a peaceful resolution between the Galactic Empire and Earth. But the king knew peace was weakness, and weakness was something he could not afford in his reign. His spies reported that Lyra had the potential to sway galactic leaders with her words, but they didn't know what they were truly up against. She was much more than they realized. The king's advisors cautioned him, speaking of the importance of maintaining an image of strength, but none of them knew what he had in mind. He was not just planning to reject her offer, he was planning to eliminate it altogether. A diplomat was a mere symbol of hope and diplomacy, a false notion that had to be crushed. The king had no interest in peace, he only wanted control. His plan was simple. A quiet, well-coordinated assassination that would make it look like an accident. It would be a minor setback for the galactic order, but no one would suspect the king himself. The diplomats of the empire would think it was a random attack, a strike from an unknown assailant, or a political rival trying to sow chaos. But the truth was much darker, and the king was certain no one would link the attack to him. After all, he was the ruler of the galaxy, untouchable, too powerful to be suspected. Lyra Volkov, on the other hand, had no idea of the danger she was about to walk into. As her ship landed gracefully on the planet's surface, her mind was focused on the task ahead. She knew the stakes of this meeting. She knew how fragile Earth's standing in the galaxy was. Humanity was just starting to find its place among the stars, and if this mission failed, Earth would be left to fend for itself. The pressure weighed on her shoulders, but she carried it with the quiet resolve that had become her trademark. She had faced far worse situations in her career, and this would be no different. Her ship's hatch opened with a soft hiss, and she stepped onto the platform. A team of armed soldiers awaited her, not unusual for such an important occasion, but their posture, their stiff formality, was a clear indication that this was not a regular diplomatic mission. Something was off. The soldiers led her to the waiting transport, and her senses heightened. Something felt wrong, but she brushed it aside. She couldn't afford distractions. Not today. Little did she know, as she was being escorted through the capital, the king's agents were already in position, preparing to carry out their plan. The palace was filled with whispers, and the halls were watched by trained eyes, every shadow hiding a threat. The king had set his trap, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lyra was expected to walk into a room where death would await her. It would look like an accident, a breakdown of security. The news would spread across the empire that the Earth diplomat had been killed in a tragic but routine occurrence. But in reality, it would be a calculated move by the king, the first step in his larger plans to consolidate power. As Lyra entered the palace, her eyes scanned the grandiose halls, noticing every detail. She had been to many grand locations, but nothing quite like this. The palace was a display of wealth and power, its architecture designed to intimidate. Yet she knew this place held far more danger than any of its ornate walls could reveal. She was here to speak of peace, but her heart knew that it might be impossible. The king watched her from his chamber, his gaze cold and calculating. He stood there, silently observing the woman who would soon be eliminated. He marveled at how her presence seemed to radiate a strange kind of power. She wasn't just a diplomat, and he had no idea how right he was. Lyra was more than a negotiator. But the king would never learn this until it was too late. He had underestimated her from the beginning. As Lyra walked deeper into the palace, unaware of the plot unfolding around her, her mind shifted. Her steps became more determined, more focused. She knew the importance of this moment. She couldn't afford to falter. The fate of Earth rested on her shoulders. But fate had something else in store for her. She was not simply a diplomat from Earth. She had a legacy, one that would soon awaken, a legacy the king could never have predicted. A legacy that would turn his deadly plot into his ultimate mistake. The moment of confrontation was closing in, but neither side knew it yet. The king's plot to kill Lyra was about to unfold, but he had no idea that this woman was not someone to be underestimated. As the tension grew, so did the unspoken promise that nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same after this day. The air was thick with tension as Lyra Volkov made her way deeper into the heart of the Galactic Palace. Every step she took echoed through the cold, metallic halls, but the diplomat kept her composure, aware that every move she made would be scrutinized. Despite the grandeur of the palace around her, she remained focused on the task ahead, peace at any cost. Her mind raced with thoughts of Earth's future, the fragile negotiations that would determine whether humanity would thrive in this vast galaxy or be crushed under the heel of the Galactic Empire. But deep within the palace, far from the diplomatic halls, something far more sinister was unfolding. The king's plan was set into motion, his agents already in position. The assassination attempt had been carefully orchestrated. They had made sure that everything would look like a terrible accident, a tragic malfunction in the palace's security system that would take the life of the Earth diplomat. No one would suspect the king, and the galaxy would remain unaware of the plot until it was too late. Lyra's instincts, however, were sharp, honed over years of navigating the political web of the galaxy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. There was an energy in the air, an unnatural stillness that felt out of place. Her eyes flicked from side to side as she observed the guards, the way they watched her closely, almost as if waiting for something. She had been trained to notice such things, the small gestures, the subtle signs of an impending danger. Something was amiss, and the more she walked through the palace, the more she could feel the growing unease settle in her chest. Her suspicions were confirmed when she entered the grand hall where the negotiation was meant to take place. The room was grand, a towering structure of polished stone and intricate designs, a symbol of the Galactic Empire's power. But today, it felt suffocating. The space, which should have been filled with light, was dimmed by the shadows of hidden intentions. Lyra stepped into the room, her sharp eyes scanning every corner, every detail. The diplomats who were supposed to welcome her were nowhere to be seen. Only a few guards remained, standing at attention. She noticed how their hands rested lightly on their weapons, their faces unreadable. No greeting, no words of courtesy. She couldn't help but feel that she had stepped into a trap. The doors slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the hall like a funeral bell. At that exact moment, the king stood in his private chamber, watching everything unfold through the palace's extensive surveillance system. His fingers twitched in anticipation. The plan was already in motion. Lyra, the Earth diplomat, would never leave this room alive. The guards were in place, and soon her life would be taken in an instant. He could already imagine the shockwave that would ripple through the galaxy. Earth's greatest hope for peace reduced to a tragic loss. The king's empire would remain uncontested, and he would continue his path to ultimate power. There would be no one left to stop him. But as he watched the screens, something shifted in the air. Lyra, though seemingly unaware of the trap set for her, had already begun to move. Her hands were steady as she approached the center of the room, her expression calm, but her mind alert. She could feel it now, the danger closing in around her. She wasn't just walking into an ordinary political negotiation. She was stepping into a game of life and death. The tension in the air thickened as the final trap began to activate. The walls of the grand hall hummed with energy, and Lyra felt the temperature rise sharply. A hidden mechanism deep within the floor beneath her started to shift, and the ground trembled slightly. Lyra's senses were on high alert now. She knew the king was watching from a distance, waiting for the moment when she would fall. But Lyra had been through worse situations than this. Her calm demeanor never wavered. She stepped back, cautiously surveying her surroundings. The palace was a labyrinth of corridors and secret passages, its ancient architecture designed not just for beauty, but to trap the unprepared. But Lyra wasn't unprepared. She had been trained in the art of survival, in the ancient ways of combat and strategy. And though she had come as a diplomat, she carried within her the power to destroy entire armies if need be. As the floor beneath her began to crack open, revealing hidden weaponry rising from beneath the surface, Lyra knew this was no ordinary trap. The king had not only set up a gas attack or hidden blasts, he had rigged the entire room to turn into a deadly arena, where she would be surrounded by turrets and automated defense drones. The entire palace was designed as a fortress. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but anticipation. This was what she had been preparing for all her life, the moment when diplomacy failed, and the true nature of power had to be shown. The first of the drones launched from hidden compartments in the walls, its sleek, metal form cutting through the air like a predator seeking its prey. It opened fire immediately, releasing a barrage of energy beams at Lyra. She reacted instantly. Her shield flickered briefly as the first blast hit, but she was already moving, her body spinning gracefully out of the way. With a swift motion, she threw a pulse grenade from her belt. It detonated midair, sending a shockwave that disintegrated the drone into molten fragments. But more drones followed, and this time, they weren't alone. Hidden within the walls were also turrets, each one locked onto her position, their targeting systems calibrated for maximum damage. Lyra's shield sparked and flickered under the relentless assault, but she didn't flinch. She knew she couldn't keep relying on defense alone. It was time to take the fight to the king. With a movement so fast it was almost a blur, Lyra leaped toward a control panel embedded in the floor, her feet barely touching the ground. The turrets continued firing, but she used the momentum from her leap to send a wave of energy across the room, disabling them one by one. Sparks flew, and the air crackled with the sound of machinery malfunctioning. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the hum of the remaining drones still trying to recalibrate. She knew the king was watching her every move. His confidence, which had been so certain before, was beginning to slip. Lyra had dismantled his traps effortlessly, showing him that he had underestimated her in the most dangerous way possible. But the king had one last card to play, one that would push her to the brink. A low rumble echoed through the palace as a large steel door on the far side of the hall began to open. From it, two towering figures emerged, large mechanical soldiers, each one equipped with heavy armor and energy-based weapons. They were the king's personal guards, elite fighters built to handle any threat, no matter how powerful. They were designed to take down entire armies, but now, they were here to deal with one woman. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She didn't hesitate. These mechanical giants were formidable opponents, but she had faced greater challenges before. She quickly assessed their weaknesses, calculating their movements and weaknesses. She could see that they relied on heavy, brute force, but they were slow, lumbering machines, not unlike a predator in a cage. The first giant raised its arm, aiming a massive cannon directly at her. Lyra darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. The shockwave from the impact sent debris flying in every direction, But Lyra remained focused. She knew she had to act fast. Time was running out. She reached for another device on her belt. This one a small, specialized EMP grenade. She hurled it at the first mechanical soldier, hitting it directly in the chest. The grenade exploded with a bright flash, sending a pulse of electromagnetic energy through the robot's systems. The soldier faltered for a split second, its movements jerky and disjointed as its internal circuits short-circuited. Lyra didn't give it a chance to recover. She rushed in, using her speed and agility to dart beneath the mechanical giant's limbs. With a sharp movement, she drove her dagger into the machine's vulnerable underside, severing key components. The soldier's movements slowed, then stopped altogether, collapsing in a heap of twisted metal and sparks. But before Lyra could catch her breath, the second mechanical giant charged at her with terrifying speed. Its massive fist slammed toward her, but she rolled to the side just in time, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. She knew she couldn't keep evading forever. She needed to end this now. The second giant swung again, but Lyra was ready. She unleashed a blast of concentrated energy from her hand, targeting the robot's energy core. The explosion tore through the robot's chest, and it fell to the ground with a thunderous crash, its systems completely fried. Lyra stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily but calm. She had done it. She had defeated the two giants, the king's last line of defense. But the danger was far from over. The king's plan had failed, but he wasn't one to give up so easily. The diplomatic envoy had been nothing more than bait, a test of her strength. And now Lyra realized the truth. She wasn't just fighting for peace. She was fighting for survival. As she made her way toward the control center, the king's voice echoed through the palace speakers, his tone dripping with anger. "You think you've won, diplomat." His voice was cold and venomous. "You've only delayed the inevitable. You're in my domain now. No one leaves my palace alive." Lyra stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing with a fire she hadn't shown before. "The only one who's going to die today is you, king," she muttered under her breath, her resolve steeling. The final confrontation was imminent. As she prepared to face the king directly, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was the beginning of a far greater war, one that would change the course of the galaxy forever. "You said." Without a warning, the lights in the room flickered, and the first trap was sprung. A loud, sudden noise echoed through the hall, followed by the hiss of a release valve. From the walls, poison gas began to pour into the room. The king smiled to himself, thinking that this would be the moment. He imagined Lyra would stumble, struggling for breath, her body succumbing to the effects of the gas. The assassination would appear to be an unfortunate accident, a malfunction of the palace's ancient security system. A perfect plan. However, Lyra didn't flinch. She had already anticipated something like this. With a swift motion, she pulled a small device from her belt, a personal shield generator. The gas, which would have quickly incapacitated anyone else, simply hit the invisible barrier surrounding her. The king's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched her calmly step forward, unaffected by the poison that filled the room. His smile faltered. This woman wasn't just an ordinary diplomat. She was a force to be reckoned with. "Is this really the best you can do?" Lyra's voice was low, but her words carried a weight that seemed to reverberate through the room. The king gritted his teeth, rage beginning to bubble beneath the surface. This wasn't supposed to happen. But before he could act, Lyra took another step. The lights flickered again, and the walls began to hum ominously. It was a subtle sound, but Lyra's trained ears heard it clearly. There were more traps, hidden dangers set to finish her off. She wasn't just any diplomat from Earth. She was much more. Lyra wasn't just a negotiator. She was the Baba Yaga, a legend feared throughout the galaxy. She had been trained in ways most beings couldn't even imagine, not just in the art of diplomacy, but in the ancient arts of combat and survival. Her powers were unlike anything the king or anyone in the galaxy had ever encountered. The truth was, Lyra had been sent to this meeting with a purpose far greater than negotiation. The peace talks were merely the surface. She had come to end the reign of the king. The traps continued, but Lyra effortlessly neutralized each one. She manipulated the environment with ease, shifting her shield to redirect energy blasts, dismantling hidden weaponry with a simple thought. Her movements were fluid, almost like a dance, as she tore apart the security systems that had been put in place to kill her. She wasn't just surviving. She was sending a message. The king was beginning to realize that his plan, his perfect assassination, was rapidly falling apart. But the king wasn't one to back down. He had underestimated Lyra, and now he could feel the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. He had never believed in the stories about the Baba Yaga. They were legends, fairy tales meant to frighten children. But here, in this moment, as he watched Lyra dismantle his traps one by one, he could feel the cold grip of reality closing in. The diplomat was no longer just an obstacle. She was a threat unlike anything he had ever known. And now he would have to face the consequences of his deadly mistake. The final trap had been set, one that would bring everything to an end. But the question was, would it be the end of Lyra or the end of the king? The palace grew deathly silent, save for the distant hum of the machinery and the quiet whir of Lyra's breathing. The king's voice, which had echoed through the palace's speakers just moments before, still lingered in her ears. His words were a venomous threat, but Lyra was no longer intimidated. She had come too far, and there was no turning back now. She had faced the mechanical giants, dismantled the king's traps, and now she was about to confront the man who had orchestrated it all. The king had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated her. As Lyra continued toward the heart of the palace, where the king's personal chambers and control room were located, she could feel the weight of the moments settling upon her. The walls, once awe-inspiring with their grandiose designs, now seemed cold and foreboding. She had entered the lion's den, and there would be no turning back from this point. It wasn't just the fate of Earth at stake anymore. It was the fate of the galaxy itself. She moved with purpose, her mind sharp and focused. The king's palace was a maze, a labyrinth designed to make anyone unfamiliar with it feel lost and disoriented. But Lyra had spent years studying the architecture of galactic power, understanding the places where influence and control resided. She knew that the king's throne room, the seat of his ultimate power, was not far ahead. Every step she took felt like it resonated throughout the building, as though the very air around her was charged with anticipation. She could hear the sound of heavy footsteps echoing in the distance, and she knew the king's guards were still watching her. But she wasn't afraid. She had fought battles far more dangerous than this, and none of them had broken her resolve. As she reached the doors to the king's control room, they slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was vast and dominated by screens, monitors, and advanced technology. The king's presence was palpable, even though he was hidden behind the wall of screens. He sat in his high-tech throne, the very picture of control, watching Lyra's every move through the surveillance cameras that lined the walls. His face, once filled with confidence, was now twisted with frustration and anger. She had made it this far, and that was something he had not anticipated. "You should have known better, Lyra." The king's voice boomed from the speakers, his tone dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but a diplomat, a simple messenger from a pitiful little world. You cannot challenge me. You cannot win." Lyra's gaze hardened as she stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the monitors. "You've made a grave mistake, King. Earth is not a pitiful little world, and I am not just a diplomat. You've awakened something you won't be able to stop." The king let out a laugh, the sound hollow and cruel. "Is that so? And what exactly do you think you are capable of, diplomat?" His words were filled with arrogance, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his voice, a doubt that had not been there before. He could sense that Lyra was no longer just the negotiator she had appeared to be. She was something else now, something far more dangerous. Lyra remained calm, her hand steady as she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, glowing object. The king's eyes narrowed as he saw it. A pulse charge, one of the most devastating weapons in the galaxy, capable of shutting down an entire planet's defense systems with a single strike. It was a weapon used only as a last resort, a tool of mass destruction. But Lyra wasn't here to use it against entire worlds. She had other plans in mind. "I'm capable of destroying everything you've built, King," Lyra said, her voice unwavering. "But I'm not here to destroy entire worlds. I'm here to destroy you." The king's smirk faltered for the briefest of moments as he stood up from his throne, his expression hardening. He had underestimated her, and now he was beginning to understand the true nature of the woman he had so casually dismissed. Lyra wasn't just a negotiator. She wasn't just Earth's last hope for peace. She was a force of nature, and he had awakened something in her that he could never control. "You think you can defeat me?" the king snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You are nothing compared to the power of the Galactic Empire. I am invincible." Lyra didn't flinch at his words. Instead, she took a step closer to him, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that seemed to pierce through him. "Your empire is built on fear and lies. You control with an iron fist, but you've forgotten the one thing that matters most. You cannot control what you cannot understand." Before the king could respond, Lyra moved swiftly, activating the pulse charge in her hand. The entire room shook as the pulse surged through the air, lighting up the screens and causing the lights to flicker. The king's eyes widened in shock as the technology around him began to shut down, his once indomitable fortress crumbling under her touch. "You may have thought you could control the galaxy, but you're not the one in control anymore," Lyra said, her voice low and steady as the room plunged into darkness. For a moment, there was complete silence, the air thick with tension. Then, slowly, the room began to light up again, but this time, the screens and monitors were blank. The king's entire control system had been disabled, and his precious palace was now vulnerable. The power that had once made him untouchable was now gone. He stood there, in the darkened room, his face twisted in fury and disbelief. For the first time in his life, he was not in control, and it terrified him. Lyra's voice broke through the silence once again, cold and unwavering. "It's over. Your reign ends here." But the king wasn't ready to admit defeat. He snarled and reached for the hidden weapon at his side, a deadly energy blade. The blade hummed with a dark, menacing glow as he advanced toward her. His fury was palpable, but Lyra wasn't afraid. She had known this moment would come. As the king lunged at her, Lyra moved with lightning speed. She dodged his attack effortlessly, her body flowing like water as she slipped behind him. With a swift strike, she disabled his weapon, sending it crashing to the floor. The king stumbled forward, his back now exposed. Lyra stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "This is the end, king. The end of your tyranny." In that final moment, Lyra did not feel anger, nor hatred. She simply felt the cold, undeniable truth of the power she had unleashed within herself. The king's reign was over. And with his fall, a new era would rise, one where peace, and not oppression, would reign. As the king collapsed to his knees, his empire crumbling around him, Lyra stood tall, a symbol of defiance and strength. She had come here as a diplomat, but now she was the harbinger of change. The galaxy would never be the same again. The king lay motionless on the cold, stone floor of the control room, his once commanding presence now nothing more than a broken figure in the ruins of his own empire. The palace, once a symbol of his absolute power, seemed to tremble around them, as if acknowledging the fall of its ruler. The darkened screens, now devoid of their all-knowing glow, flickered one last time before plunging into total silence. Lyra stood over him, her chest rising and falling with each breath, her mind sharp, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The fight had been long, and the tension had been overwhelming. But now that it was over, She felt an eerie calm wash over her. The fate of the galaxy had shifted in her favor, but the cost had been high. She hadn't just fought for survival. She had fought to destroy the very system that had allowed a tyrant like the king to rule. And she had succeeded. But even as she stood victorious, Lyra could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The king's fall was monumental, but there were still countless others who held power, others who would not take kindly to his defeat. She had shattered one empire, but the galaxy was filled with others, all built on the same foundation of fear and control. Her mission was far from over. The silence in the room was broken by a low, strained voice. The king, still alive, struggling to lift his head. "You think you've won, Diplomat." His voice was weak, laced with pain, but there was still a trace of the arrogance that had once made him a figure of terror. "Do you think your victory will change anything? There will be others. There will always be others like me." Lyra's gaze hardened, but she did not speak immediately. Instead, she crouched down, her eyes locking with his as he struggled to meet her gaze. She had seen this kind of arrogance before, victims of power who believed their fall meant the end of their world. The truth was far more complex. "You're wrong," Lyra finally said, her voice calm but filled with unwavering conviction. "Your reign is over, but you're not the end of the story. Your empire is built on lies, on manipulation, and on fear. But fear does not last forever. The people who followed you are already waking up, seeing the truth. Your fall is the first step toward a galaxy where no one will have to live under the boot of a tyrant again." The king's eyes, filled with bitterness and disbelief, narrowed. "You believe the people will rise. They are weak, just like you." Lyra's expression remained unchanged. "I'm not weak. I never was." Her words were a quiet but powerful statement, a reminder to herself of the strength she had unearthed within herself during this journey. But she knew that even though she had defeated him, the king's words held a certain truth. The battle for peace had only just begun. She couldn't do it alone. Without another word, Lyra turned her back on the fallen ruler. She didn't need to finish him off, didn't need to prove anything more. The king was powerless now, nothing but a shadow of his former self. She knew the galaxy would soon see the truth for what it was, a fragile web of lies, built upon the backs of countless beings like her. And now, it was time for a new kind of order, one where the people could finally stand on their own. The air around her seemed to hum as she left the control room, her mind already racing through the next steps. The Alliance, the ragtag group of rebels, diplomats, and freedom fighters she had once worked with, would need to know what had happened here. The news of the king's fall would spread like wildfire across the stars. But what would come next? The power vacuum would surely breed chaos, and in the coming months, Lyra knew she would have to help rebuild, to ensure that those who came after the king would not repeat the same mistakes. The fight for true freedom was never easy, and she was all too aware of the struggles that lay ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope, something she hadn't felt since Earth had been thrown into this war. The people had been silenced for too long, their cries ignored. But now, they had a voice. As she moved through the corridors of the palace, she passed the shattered remnants of the king's empire, the broken screens, the smoldering wreckage of the mechanical soldiers, and the silent halls once filled with the echo of power. It was all fading away, the final remnants of a system built on fear and oppression. The king was gone, but his legacy was not easily erased. Her communicator buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She didn't need to check the display to know who it was. Her closest allies, the members of the Earth Alliance, who had been waiting for news. She answered without hesitation. "Lyra, is it done?" The voice on the other end was filled with hope, a hint of disbelief. "It's done," Lyra replied, her voice steady, but tinged with exhaustion. "The king is dead. His empire is crumbling. But the real work is just beginning. We need to unite, rebuild, and ensure that this galaxy will never again be ruled by fear." There was a long pause on the other end. And then a quiet cheer erupted from the team. They knew the implications of her words. They understood that the fight was far from over, but they also understood that this moment, this victory, was monumental. It was the first step towards something greater. "We'll be ready, Lyra," the voice said, filled with determination. "We'll stand with you." Lyra smiled, though it was a bittersweet smile. "I know you will. We all will." As she stepped outside the palace, the vast galaxy stretched out before her, filled with possibilities. The stars were still dark, but now, for the first time, she felt as though they weren't just distant points of light. They were a future that could be shaped by those brave enough to stand up and fight for it. Lyra had been one of the first to rise, but she wouldn't be the last. And as the winds of change began to sweep across the galaxy, Lyra knew one thing for certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. The king was gone. The people were waking up. The rebellion was just beginning. And she would be there, leading the charge.